how do we assess, let's bridge those two gaps, right? How do we assess student dialogue in the classroom?
Yes, exactly.
And how do we encourage student dialogue, and how do we let students feel safe and encouraged to participate in civil discourse, but at the same time hold them accountable for what they're saying?
Perfect. That's what you're perfect. I'm gonna press.
That's how I'd like to frame it. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but man, that's where my brain is right now. Patrick, go ahead.
And I wrote it down. Better that than discussion. I like dialogue better than discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Difference, but I like it better.
Hi, just a quick question. I'm teaching AP US History and also AP Psych, and I'm just curious. I am told I have to teach a semester in 9 weeks, basically 74-minute periods, which is not very much in my view. But anyway, does anyone have a similar experience? Are you going to be having to condense it in 9 weeks or something similar?
I will tell you, Patrick, that's what I did last. I mean, because for us, we're only semester, but we have a 2-week break because we're modified year round. So it's weird. Like, I mean, I like the schedule because I'm in Arizona, and I was telling Peter before my internet wasn't working today because it's been like 117 degrees for however many weeks, which is, again, start of school, it's always normal for our internet not to work. But I last semester condensed it all down and taught it, I think, in 8 weeks. Not my favorite thing to do, but it is doable with, if you say 74-minute, I think I had 80-minute periods. And I was able to do it and then have them do stuff at home that was meaningful. But I thought that was meaningful. I mean, I'm sure seniors fourth quarter last year didn't think a whole lot was meaningful, but it can be done. It's just, it's a dance is really what it is. So if you need
sounds
help,
like
I can send it to you.
Well, I'm already making, but from a cognitive processing standpoint, there doesn't seem to be enough time to process all of this information. Then APUSH, also a semester in 9 weeks, I'm just wondering how many other people, Jeanette, you said you had that?
Yeah, we're doing quarters, so they're splitting up our classes by quarter. We only have like students taking 4 classes for the first quarter, and then each week, 4 days a week, I only get them for 50 minutes, and then 1 day a week, I only get them for 30. And so that's on a 9-week, and I teach AP biology, so it's going to be real tricky.
Anyway, I thank you for having this, and I'm just looking for any tips. And
so I want to run the question back to you guys. Jeanette, you said you're doing 4 50-minute periods per week plus 130 for a 9-week quarter. So that's roughly 2,000 minutes in terms of contact time. And Patrick, you said similarly you're doing 74-minute periods, I think, for 9 weeks. But what's the touch point? Is it 4 times per week or 5?
5 times a week, 3 periods a day.
So it's a true block schedule, essentially.
I have no idea what it is, but it's
incredible. So I guess one of the things that I was fortunate enough to experience was fortunate and misfortunate. The Lucas PBL prescription, let's say, that drove me nuts for the first 2 years of when I was working with it was actually running on a minute basis. So here's your unit, you've got like 575 minutes per unit. And I'm like, wait, how do I break that down? So one way of looking at kind of the curriculum is from, if we're going to do backwards design, you can actually, you can take the 5 basic units that we have and break them backwards proportionally based on the prescriptive amount of time that we have from College Board to say, here's how much time we should spend on these units. And that becomes easier for us as OGs, right? To be able to say, okay, I get that, this is the piece of the pie that I've got for here, and the piece of the pie that's got for over in this area. So that's one way of backwards designing it.
So it's all about pacing it. The new overview, the new Acorn book or whatever, basically says basically says that we have X amount of class periods. And my principal, when I brought this up, he said, well, right here, it says your periods are 45 minutes or 50 minutes. So it's the same amount of minutes. And I think that's just preposterous to say that. To process.
No, it's not. It's got to be proportional based on the amount of time you have. The pie is the same, the pie doesn't change. The number of times that we have within that pie are going to be proportional based on how much time we're giving with student contact.
Yeah.
Which begs the question to go back to, if we're going to have discussion-based or more dialogical based experiences on Zoom or wherever we're doing it, how do we actually give students the material outside of class and then hold them accountable inside of those sessions to get the gist out of the material that we want them to do? So how do you assign Federalist 10 or whatever 51, and then how do we have a dialogue about that? And I think that's kind of where we are tonight, and that's, Liz, you were there to kind of lead us on that.
Yeah. So Socratic discussion is one of my very favorite things to do.
Are we recording right now, guys? Hold on,
Yes.
hold on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we are recording. Yeah.
Go right ahead.
I got you, Peter.
I've got my cassette right next to me, my 8-track.
So for me, Socratic seminars are just my jam in class as it is, because I think that when you talk about things like Brutus 1 and Fed 10, kids look at those and they're like, oh, like they hate them. It's not written in a language that they know. It's hard for them to understand. And so one of the big things that I did in class, and then I did it online too, was how do we then take a discussion and make it so that everybody understands it? So, when we look at online discussion, there was always a goal. So we did Brutus and Fed 10, and the goal was, at the end of this today, you're just going to understand it. We're not here to be like, look at everything I know about Brutus, because, or look at everything I know about Fed 10. It was, what are they saying? How are they saying it? What are some things that we know? And so I had a video for my kids that I would put online, and I would be going through my own annotations, because I have my book, my Federalist Papers book from 4 years ago that has tons of annotations in it, because even as a teacher, I don't know everything. And the more you talk about it, the more you learn. So when you set it up that way of, hey, our goal today is just to get it. And that's where we're at. So if you're asking questions, if you're saying like, hey, I noticed this, did anybody else notice it? And you're giving them those cues for those more difficult documents that you talk about, Paul, that kids like really just don't, like, it's hard for them. That is the kind of stuff I would do. So when we talk about like discussion like this in a virtual world, my first thing is always, what is our goal today? So there are some things like, hey, you all read an article about, COVID-19 as it relates to federalism. So just FYI, today, our goal is to make sure you understand the link between this article and the concept of federalism. It's not your opinions are great and you can have those at the dining room table. Here we're here to learn. And I tell them, because anything I've ever been at as a teacher is there to learn. Nobody wants that person who knows everything. And so for me, especially with these harder documents, they've seen my annotations. They've seen me go over them. Like I have my camera, like my phone set up so it looks like a doc cam. And it's me going through, and it's me saying like, oh, I actually don't know what this word is, so I'm going to circle it and look it up later. Or, oh, I noticed this, here's a question I have. Because I think one of the things too that we forget is not every kid knows how to annotate. Like they don't all come into our classrooms like ready to do all their annotation. So I mean, for me, and I've written about this too, I call it document week, because I'm like, you got to stick with me. We got lots of documents to go through. Unit 1 is like it's the 7th layer of Dante's Inferno. It is documents, but stay with me because we're all going to learn. And so that's kind of where I take it from, is discussions at the beginning, especially in that first unit, and even into the second, because unit 2 is so big. We're here to learn. And then the thought process, and I always did unit 3 last, which totally bit me in the butt for like last semester. But by that time, now I'm assessing you on what you're saying, the connections that you're making. Like I have an actual thing I use to, and I don't want to say grade them or assess them. It is just how I look at what we've done as a collective and then how we move forward, if that answers the question, Paul. I don't know if it does. Paul, you're muted.
Now I'm not muted. I bet my wife would appreciate if I could actually be muted at her command. Muted, not muted, muted, not muted. And I think we could probably all say that in our relationships, to say this student should be muted at this time. I can think of 5 actually off the top of my head from last year. Luckily they all graduated. No, I appreciate that. And I guess when we talk about student dialogue and student civil discourse and their ability to engage each other, let me ask this question: how do we remove ourselves from the conversation, and how do we let the students become more center stage? And it's not so much like, did you get 51 today? Beddoes 51. It's more about, okay, we've got all this stuff. You've got this, that, and whatever document you give them, and you're funneling stuff into them because we are teachers, or we ascribe to be. But then, how do we give them the confidence and the ability to problem solve? And I saw that come up on the chat. Problem solving is yes. The problem solving is give them the information and let them figure it out. And so I know, and I guess the first thing that I'm taking away from this is that our time is condensed, 9 weeks, 54 minutes or 73 minutes, whatever the case may be. How do we do that?
And I think that.
And how do we feel confident that the kids are going to walk away with, did they get it? Maybe not. Did they actually get the skills to have a dialogue? Yep, they did.
So I think for me, one of the ways I remove myself is I literally remove myself, and I turn off my audio and I turn off my video, because through the years, what you notice is that kids will like look at you. So when they're talking, they're like looking for your response to be like, oh yeah. And so I'm like, I'm here, and I'm here in case things go off the rails, or if you're saying anything that is just patently false, like I'm going to step in. But in here, and the first like 2 discussions for me are always where are we at in this class? Like, who are these kids? Because Paul, I have those kids. I had a kid that, if you let him, would talk the entire time. And so for that student, it was like, you can actually lose points by not letting other people talk, because not everybody thinks as fast as you, and that's cool. Like, I mean, we're all so different. But it is just giving them a place to explore. And
yeah, that's what Mary's doing tonight. She's controlling the entire conversation. Sorry, Mary, I'm just picking on you because you look really comfortable there.
You do.
So I think that idea is really interesting, and I never thought about it until now. It's like, so if we take ourselves out of the dialogue by just muting and not having the video screen, so they just see Liz on the video. The students are less likely to try to grab that, like, oh, I know you're looking at me and I'm trying to get your attention, when we're really trying to ask them to be dialogical with each other, if you will, and really to be in a way respectful of each other's conversation, and then to say, hey, we're recording this.
Yep. And giving them sentences.
So does anyone have any issues with their district with recording Zoom sessions, or with asking students to show up? Renee, yeah.
So I'm in Seattle, and we don't have an official schedule. School doesn't usually start till after Labor Day, but we've been told we can't use Zoom, that Teams is supposed to be allowing us to have breakout groups, but none of us have seen this. None of us have experimented with it. We don't know if we're going to be allowed to record. We don't really know anything at this point.
So I will say that I've used Teams, and Teams is pretty good.
We've been using Teams as a staff,
Okay.
and we've rolled it out a little bit with the kids, but the breakout room feature is not something that we've had access to, even as a staff.
And even in Zoom, it's hard to, actually it's impossible to record breakout rooms. So that's an interesting point too. Someone else is going to chime in there. Yeah. Sorry, go for it.
We're going to try to have our kids be synchronous with their course schedule so that when we go to hybrid, we will be able to hopefully seamlessly get them back into school.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see how that goes.
God bless you. That's a challenge in and of itself. The synchronous, asynchronous, kids in class, kids not in class, but in class via whatever medium is challenging, especially when we talk about these ideas of discussion-based understanding of documents. The first unit is challenging in itself. How do you get a teenager to understand how important these foundational documents are, from the Constitution to the Bill of Rights to the Federalist Papers? You can sit and preach and say, well, other countries who have created these constitutional democracies have actually read the Federalist Papers. And the typical 17 was like, cool. Is it on a meme? But the dialogue with that, and Liz, you brought this up in saying that you use other sources. You take an article from whatever, Fox or the Washington Post, whatever the case may be, about federalism today, and you can't actually drop in on the news today without actually understanding federalism. So that might be an interesting way of creating that. I don't know if any of you have seen the Exeter Humanities Institute. It's run out of Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. There's my connection, Peter. They run they run the Harkness seminar. That's their whole pedagogical base. And yes, it's Exeter, and yes, they feed into Harvard, Yale, or whatever it is. But it's really an interesting format to say, how do we let go of the conversation in the classroom, and how do we make every classroom dialogical? And they do math seminars every day. So go figure, algebra as a seminar.
Paul, what was that called?
It's called the Exeter Humanities Institute, the EHI. It's out of Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. It's super fun. I was very fortunate and lucky enough to go there a long time ago. But the Harkness method is how this idea of the seminar or the Socratic seminar is taught. And a true Socratic seminar really doesn't have an end, right? It's a continual dialogue of how do we develop a deeper understanding, and there's no true answer. Kind of like our society today. Yeah.
Liz, can we go back to your Socratic seminar? So I want to make sure I understand you right. So in the virtual world, you are going to give your kids an opportunity to continue to engage in Socratic seminars. But what you're really looking for is an expression of content knowledge. Is that what you said? Did I get that right?
Yeah, because at the beginning, I think for them, they're always worried about how they're being graded. And for so long it was, well, how many times do I have to talk? And I'm like, I'm so sick of that question. It makes me want to throw up, because talking doesn't equate anything. And so I finally started tying it into their writing. Like, hey, you're going to be assessed. And I actually did it with 8th graders. So I'd gifted 8th graders. Once I tried it with them, I did it with my AP kids. You're like, we're going over things. We'll go over these documents. We'll talk about them. The expectation is you're going to bring in stuff. I mean, again, government happens every day, you're going to bring it up in your Socratic discussion. And like Paul said, there is no end. There is no answer to this, because if there was an answer, it wouldn't be a discussion. But then I'm actually going to tie that into your writing the next day. So for us, I wrote about this like too, about a sample schedule, but for me, it was always, we have a day of getting content knowledge. So whether that was a lecture, maybe a short video, or I'd assign videos, like quick things for them to watch at home. The second day was a reading, and I say day because, I mean, time is a construct at this point. But the next thing for them to do was a reading. So whatever reading that tied into, and again, those first 2 weeks are very, very document heavy. So I had them read Brutus 1 and Fed 10. I had them do all of these things. And then the next block of time was the discussion. And it was, and again, I'm not in the discussion. I am just here, I'm writing. Like I just would write and be like, here's what they're not getting. It was kind of my like informal assessment, but then their formal assessment is, okay, before they, you know, would leave the Zoom or whatever for the day, it was, here's the question you're going to be asked to write about, you know, and if it's an especially argumentative essays, because that's one of the things they tended to have a harder time with, is checking the boxes. And I hate saying that, but it's writing that good argumentative essay. And it's like, you've already spoken the argumentative essay. Here's what your prompt is going to be. You know, I'm going to stay on for a few minutes in case you like really didn't get Fed 51, or you really are not understanding this. And then they would write. And a lot of times, and I put it in the chat, I have a like assessment piece that I use that has what I would check mark. And then I would have them do their writing. So if I had a kid and I would say like, we're only going to write a thesis statement today, because we're not writing, like, to me, argumentative essays are a marathon. We don't run a marathon the first day of training. That's ridiculous. You don't run that marathon until May, whatever. I am here to make sure that you have all the pieces so that when you run this marathon, you're good, regardless of what the prompt is. So it was writing a thesis statement. So they would use these, you know, all of this stuff to write their thesis statement. And that would be our focus for the day. And I can then assess that, because then I could say, hey, Peter, you know, I noticed in your thesis, you did not have a line of reasoning. However, yesterday when you talked and when you said X, Y, and Z, that is a line of reasoning. And it just helps kids connect all of these pieces. Because then the thought is, by the time we're in, you know, week 5 or 6 and we're deep into unit 2 or other units, this just becomes a piece of what we do. And this becomes this like, hey, Paul, you said X, Y, and Z. What evidence are you using? How are you using the Constitution to back up what you just said? And what kids are starting to do is they're starting to speak the language of APGov. They're starting to speak the language of the rubric.
Okay, but here's my question. So assessment and feedback, one implies a grade and the other just implies, I want to share with you what I think about what you had to say. Are you actually grading dialogue when we go online, or are you just giving feedback?
I'm giving feedback. Now, if you have, you know, because I had kids that wouldn't show up, I'd have kids that wouldn't turn on their cameras. And the question is, for me, it's always assuming positive intent. Unfortunately, I live in a place where I have a lot of kids whose parents have lost their jobs. So being on at a certain time doesn't work because they have a shift at the grocery store. They have a shift somewhere else. And so for me, it was, how do I navigate that? How do I navigate a student? You know, we live in a population with a lot of Mormon families. How do I navigate a situation where a parent has 6 kids at home and the kid just can't? Their camera doesn't work. Like, I mean, I ran into technology issues today, and I have 1 kid at home doing stuff. So for me, it becomes about feedback, because it becomes about learning. And we're assessing later. And you know what, though? Sometimes these discussions are so amazing that it's like, we don't even need to do the writing. but it depends on the class. It depends on the kids. Those kids who weren't able to be there for whatever reason. And again, I personally never ask because of my community, because it is not a child's responsibility to tell me, hey, both my parents lost their job. We're going to lose our house if I don't do my shift at Taco Bell. But we have a Flipgrid that we use that needs to be posted before whatever date, and you need to be responding and you need to be engaging because they still need to make sure you get it. And so I guess that's the piece for me, is when I say assessment, it's an informal. Good.
And if I could just run with that, so those of you who are here tonight, is there anybody planning on actually grading what Paul is, and I like the phrase dialogue much more than discussion. Is there anybody planning on putting some kind of letter grade on it, or just
our future? Oh, I saw that.
What was that? Paul, are you going to grade the attempts at dialogue or just give feedback?
I'm going to assess, and I'm going to go the purple route, and be in the middle and say that I'm not going to grade it, but I'm going to assess it and say, here's my interpretation of your participation in this type of dialogue. Will it be part of the grade book? Yeah, ultimately it will. Will it be a hard grade? Well, you got a 10 out of 15 today? No. But in the middle there'll be a rubric, and I can share that. I'll put that up in the space tomorrow. It's really based on not just how much you speak, but essentially the personality you bring to that speaking engagement. Are you a facilitator, or are you a person of information? Are you a person who is capable of understanding the big picture and then redirecting the language to a different level? So that's how I use that type of group dynamic. It could be small group, it could be whole class, and even the most sensitive introvert has a role in their ability to take notes and to say at the end of the dialogue, here's what I think we came to a conclusion with, and that's really a good role for people who don't want to engage on a verbal level. So yeah, Patrick, go ahead.
One of the ways I'm going to plan on implementing more dialogue or discussion is beginning of the year, the quarter, I'm going to divide them up into groups of five kids. And then I'm going to make a requirement that after we review some content, we'll get them they have to have a structured discussion with very specific guidelines based on the content. Could be documents, it could be, depending on what the topic to discuss. And it won't be a long, hours worth. It might be 20 minutes, 15 minutes, something of that nature. And so I'm going to make each team, basically a study team, I'm going to keep them in that study team for at least 3 to 4 weeks, maybe the whole 9 weeks, not sure yet. But I'll have them run their own Zoom dialogues. So they have the responsibility of managing it. They have to tape it or digitize it, and then they upload it to whatever the Canvas, and then I can just click on it and watch it, see if they follow the structured discussion, and hopefully it'll be quick and easy to assess. I won't have to do. I don't want to be in the room. I want them to manage it, and they'll take turns managing and hosting the Zoom or whatever format they choose, and then go from there. And I think it has to be graded. I think, but the structure has to be there. I use some of the Avid Right Path structured discussions is really good, easy for the kids to follow, and some basic norms and things. I don't expect perfection in any way, but I think it puts the onus on them. And again, one other thing is that they have to be prepared, or they can't participate in a discussion. If they don't participate, then they automatically a reduction. But I think that's the way I'm going to handle in the periodic or structured type discussions regularly in the environment, I guess.
So Patrick, if I could just make sure I understand that. So basically, whether it's a Socratic dialogue or whatever, right? Some kind of structured opportunity to discuss. And then they're going to go off in a breakout room, small groups.
Well, they're going to do this all on their own.
Right.
Their teams will be made up already. And so I'll say, okay, Paul and Monica and David and Liz and Peter, you guys that's your group. Peter, you're in charge this week. Here's the instructions. This is the content that we've already been working with. And so you manage this discussion. And if kids don't show up, they're going to get reduction of points. If they don't have their, prep work done, then they're not going to participate. And you'll each take turns every week. And, you're going to record it. You upload it. I evaluate it. If I look at it, depending on what's going on.
How many would you structure that for? You give them
15 or 20.
It's a nice idea.
It seems like the best way based on been researching all this stuff for the last, since March.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be the consensus is that too many kids, too many people, you can't have an effective discussion. Because kids still hide like they do in the classroom. But I think this is a way, I personally think that this is going to be extremely difficult for my students. And they need to work together and they need to help each other. And so you can always have someone to go to, hey, and they're on their phones anyway. What the hell did he say? I don't know. That's my plan. So.
I like this. You said if you've bumped into that anywhere, web page, somebody who's written about it, if you could send that to me.
I have a whole file folder of distance learning stuff that I've been working on. So I found a few cool things and they kind of reinforce it. I think I'm okay in this. I don't know how it's going to work in 9 weeks, but I'm going to try.
But the point to be made here, and there's a teacher I know, APGov teacher, APGov, really respect him, really bright guy, and he just flat out says that dialogue should never be graded. We should not be doing. We should be providing feedback and encouragement and so on.
I agree with that, but these are teenagers and the behavioral aspects. You want to get them to rise to the challenge, especially if they're overwhelmed and busy. They won't do anything unless it's graded. I mean, that's been my experience. I know but a behavioral reward for participation is really.
So I do have a question about that. And I think my question comes from being a teacher of twice exceptional students, students who are gifted, but then have autism or they have, whatever else. What does that look like for a student? Because I think the reason I do things the way I do is because I had a kid that was, her anxiety, and she had a diagnosed disease. She had a 504, and she said, I would rather fail than have to speak. Like, I just can't do it. Or you have those kids who are saying, hey, I didn't get this at all. I don't understand anything. So I don't want to speak because I don't want to sound stupid. Like those, how do we address that then? Because that for me is, again, there's always a goal to everything, but how do we work around that? How do we work around the kid that woke up and was sick, or that is helping their younger sibling with their stuff? Like, I think that's the hardest thing here, is what does it look like in a world where we want to ensure that every student learns, because this isn't like the classroom. They're not that audience that's sitting there and they're in your class, and it's easy to be like, hey, Evans, I don't understand this. Can you explain this quick? Yeah, sure. It is on here. And I don't know how you guys feel, but, especially fourth quarter, being in the thousands of meetings that we were in, I felt very vulnerable. And I'm a veteran teacher and I'm nationally board certified and I should know all of this stuff. And I didn't speak at all because I I didn't know what to ask. I didn't know how to say it. And I think that in a classroom setting with your kids, it's so different. But how do we take this and make those exceptions that we all make? We all make these little exceptions throughout the day because we're doing 10,000 things. How do we translate those to a virtual setting? That's for anybody.
Well, personally, I think you're going to have the kids that are ready to go and the kids that aren't. And unfortunately, this is especially for the AP. It's not for everyone. It's not for kids who are not ready. And they shouldn't be in those because they're going to get ultra frustrated. But I think regular classes should do the same thing. I don't see why this isn't doable. But every kid is going to have whatever baggage they're going to come with. And geez, I'm going to have only 90, thank goodness, for 9 weeks, and then I'll get another 90. But the point is, I just think you're exactly right. Encourage, and Paul, you mentioned that, encourage and support and structure and scaffold and all those things that we wanted them for them. But they have to stand and take accountability, responsibility, and again, that's a skill, and sometimes they may not do it. But our goal is to try to encourage them, make the structure so they can manage it in chunks. But you're not going to be successful every kid, and every kid's going to have times when they're not going to be where they need to be.
I think students want to be held accountable, number one, and they hold us accountable by making them accountable. So one of the strategies that I've used in the past is what's called random assessment, meaning that we're going to have 7 or 8 or whatever they are formal dialogues, seminars. I call them seminars. The first 3 or 4, I'm going to provide feedback. This is where I see you. This is the kind of role I see you playing in this. This is how I'm going to hold you accountable later. And then maybe the last 3 or 4, I'm going to say, of these 4, I'm actually going to grade you on one of them. And so I'll pick 5 or 6 kids out of 20, 25 and say, here are the kids I'm focusing on today. And they don't know. It's a crapshoot for them. But at the same time, you're holding everyone accountable for a dialogue, and that's what we want to be held accountable for. And then if we have to kind of report back on grades and said, well, okay, this is how I saw you. If I had to put you on a scale of an A to whatever grade, this is how I saw you on this day. And then give them a chance to reflect back on it and say, actually today I was having this issue. I'll give kids a second chance. This is what was going on, and whatever. Kids will be kids, and we all have adult issues too. But what they want to be held accountable to on a daily basis is, are you actually checking on me to know if I've actually done the work that you're actually wanting me to do? And they want to do the work, but they're like water. They're going to find the path of least resistance. Unless you hold them accountable, they're going to find the quickest way down the mountain. So anyway, I apologize. I've got to jump off. I've got another call in 4 minutes. I really appreciate this, and I'm glad you're recording. Peter, I'll follow up with you. And Liz, thank you for helping out tonight. We'll be in touch too. I have your another tab on my plethora of tabs. So I'm going to check that out. So everyone, thank you so much. I appreciate tonight's conversation. Thank you.
Take care, Paul. Thanks.
I got it.
Really interesting conversation here. I'm seeing all sides of this, and I think the one thing all teachers can agree on is we want students to use class time when we're face to face to discuss important issues related to our subject matter. I mean, we all agree on that. And the next question then is, to what extent are we going to hold them accountable to that discussion? Are we going to attach a grade to it? Or are we simply going to let them explore ideas, letting those who want to step forward, and not? Clearly, the Socratic seminar, much of it has been set up with check marks and grades and so on. I mean, we all know that. But once we get into a virtual setting, an online environment, I can't help but wonder if it all changed. Patrick, I really like what you had to say, and somehow that one seems to address a lot of those issues that camera, being afraid of the camera, fear of public speaking, so on and so on, or so it seems. But I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about it some more.
I think the big thing too is looking at what is an alternative, because I think as teachers, again, we're always planning for like, okay, well, I mean, even when we're in the classroom, like, well, so many kids are going to be out on a field trip, or so many kids are going to be sick. I don't know about your states, but something weird always hits Arizona in February. So half my kids are gone all the time this year. We know what it was, but you know, what is this alternate look like? Because for me, and I think the biggest thing here is, you know, your kids, you know, your community, you know, the days where you can be like, no, everybody needs to come in and you guys need to be ready. That's me when they read letter from a Birmingham jail. Like, sorry, you've all been here for 15 weeks now. There's literally no reason. And if there was a reason, we should have had a conversation already. But it's knowing your kids and knowing, you know, Paul said it, that path of least resistance. Like, okay, how can we take them off that path and just push them a little bit? So then the path of least resistance is a little bit over here. And then you keep pushing them throughout the year. Because the one thing that we don't want to do is create more work for teachers. And I hate saying that, but I'm going to say it. Like, teachers work way too hard sometimes, and you're going to have kids that are going to have their cameras on and they're going to be jerks. Like, okay, well, cool, I guess when I get your writing assignment, that'll reflect it. But we're trying to reach as many as we can, but we're also not miracle workers. And, you know, here in Arizona, teachers are just vilified and they have such a difficult time. And one of my biggest things is boundaries. And so for me, you know, in a virtual world, we're going to have this. If not, you have a flip grid and it is due tomorrow at noon, because you're on your phones all the time. You can record something and you can respond. Mm-hmm. And if not, okay, well, it's a no grade then, because you don't get a grade for doing nothing. Because we used to have a 50% rule that no matter what, a kid got 50%. And I was like, no, because if I don't pay my bills, they're not like, oh, that's fine, we'll knock it down 50%. But again, I think for me it is, where do we start? And that I always have the first Socratic seminar. And for me, I'm just writing things down. Like, I noticed that kids don't have sentence stems for when they disagree with each other. I noticed that they just say like, oh, Peter, I agree, and think that that's good enough. Like, here's this. They get class feedback. And then we just keep moving, because again, here's my endpoint with you, whether that's 9 weeks, whether it's 18, whether it's a whole year, here's our endpoint. How do we work backwards from that? And so that's kind of my, you know, big thing. And I always use, sorry, my voice is going out. I always use their writing afterwards. That's what I graded. Because by the time we've talked about it, you should have a deeper understanding. That's what got graded. And that always went in as a bigger grade. And that's why they paid attention in the Socratic, because they could write things down. And if you want to write things down and use them in your writing, that's great, because your writing needs to reflect you. Because P.S., I've also been your teacher for however, I know how you write. I was an English teacher for a while too, which is probably why I am that way.
Patrick, and I know Liz's answer is, but David, Patrick, Mary, Karen, Jeanette, Monica, are you all, is it a requirement to have their cameras on? And what do you do when students don't put their cameras on? Where are you with all of the camera issues?
We haven't been told where we are yet. We will be starting after Labor Day. And they just haven't come out with what the rules are. The rules were, the kids were not ever required last semester to be synchronous. So whoever was there, and who wasn't. So.
I mean, obviously we'd like to see the cameras because it helps us, but.
Well, we kind of set the rule as a department, English department, that, you know, video on, audio off. And then we were asking for feedback. What are some of the rules that kids would like to see, you know, and then what are some that they would not like to see? And about half of them said, or maybe not half of them, but quite a few of them said they don't like the rule of having the camera on because they feel shy or whatever, for whatever reason, that they just did not like having the camera on. And I'm like, well, I don't like having the camera on either. I feel like I'm talking to myself in a computer. So, but you know, it's kind of, I told them it was a campus directive. So that's kind of the way I took it.
Jeanette, where are you with the camera issue?
So our district, so again, I teach AP biology, so I'm a little different content, but they've decided that we can't require them to use cameras, but I am going to have, like, as a component of my overall grade for the semester, 5% being discussion, just like actively engaging in class Zoom conversations, large group, small group breakout sessions, or like we do Schoology, so Schoology discussion posts. So I feel like with the exception where Liz is saying, like, we make exceptions, I can make exceptions where that kid can come and talk to me during office hours and make up those points if something like they're working or whatever, or I can rearrange time with, you know, multiple students that had to miss class for whatever reason. But same as Karen was saying, we were discouraged from doing synchronous learning in the spring. And so this is kind of new for us and the kids. And so I'm excited to do it, but I'm also thinking that they can engage in a conversation without having their camera on. So I think the way I've been listening a lot, but I think an interesting way, I've been flipping my classroom for a little while, where I have my students do a lot of content background at home and take notes and have a checkup from the textbook, but then also I do a formative check as soon as they come to class. So I was going to use those and kind of pare them down a little bit just to make sure that they understand the nitty-gritty content, and then move them into like application-based stuff in the Zoom, or take the application-based formative and like put it into a Zoom discussion. Another way I've done that before, and I feel like this would go along with Patrick, what you were saying about having kids like in 4 or 5 is like have them, you know what they know, and then send them off with a discussion series of questions and have a kid be a leader of that. In some way. I've had kids be leaders of like the formative overview and like do it themselves, even in class. So yeah, I'm kind of dealing with that. Like, I haven't really put a hard like objective thing to it, but it's like I have to put a carrot out there because otherwise they're not going to participate. So I'm hoping that they will be willing to have their cameras on. But
so I like everything you said here. One thing I'm curious about though, and I stumble every year through this, I've never been able to get satisfied with an answer, but 5% of the overall grade does not seem like a lot. And so I question if we so value that our students discuss, and we so want them to learn to discuss better, more civilly, whatever, we have standards for it. Why do we not attach a greater percentage to it? Because do the students, do you really think they take it all?
Yeah, so yeah, I thought like the 5% would just be enough for them, like, because a lot of my kids being AP students just care about their grade. And so that 5%, if they don't get it, lowers their grade 5%. So, and I've adjusted my assessments to be worth less than they usually are in a face-to-face setting, because that will discourage them from cheating on them, and encourage them to be more involved in the rest of the class. And that's actually a district team decision that we've decided on. And so really the 5% was just to be like, look, it's going to be important to collaborate and to have these discussions, to talk about content and work through like applications of biology. And if you don't, you're not going to pass the test. That's all it is now. So, you know, I figured it's not that much, so it won't really hurt them if they're not doing it, I guess. But it, you know, I mean, if they have a C, they have probably a C, right? With or without the discussion. But I mean, if they're doing the discussion component of the class online or in synchronous lessons, at least they would have, you know, something to help them push them up higher.
Patrick, 5% or higher?
I don't give any percentages when I grade. I just say this is worth, every assignment is worth points. Back pre-COVID days, I would give tests, make the tests really high level of points. A homework assignment would be 30 points. And basically textbook reading. a test would be 700 points.
Hmm.
And so it's just, they don't know really what to expect, but they know it's points. And if, let's say, a bunch of the kids don't do it, I can raise the points and say, no, you gotta do it. And, but that's how I do it. I don't write those concrete, but I estimate, okay, I can say that 70% of your grade is tests, but everything has a point value, and then it leaves me an open wiggle room to adjust where I need to, so I don't have any set focus like that.
David, Mary, Karen, Renee, anybody?
So, I mean, our admin just put out a directive that they ask that students, just like it would be in the school day, that they're actually present, that their cameras are on. I think on a individual basis, if there's an issue, I'm just going to say, look, just at least talk to me and try to, usually be able to work something out on that. But honestly, for me, it's just the assessment piece of doing it online. Because I mean, it just seems like as of right now, I'm assuming I also teach AP biology as well, but I've not heard that they're doing any major, like the test is still the traditional test coming up, and then like our admin is like, well, you need to find these new innovative ways to assess. But I'm like, well, you're not really trained, you're not really getting them the practice that.
You're like, I don't actually get paid to do that. That's what you get paid to do. That's why you get more salary.
Well, I mean, and it's just like, well, we have to do this whole different way of assessing. It's like, you're not preparing them for the way that they're going to be assessed on the exam. And that's, that's part of the reason why we're, offering this course. So I don't know. It feels like a rock and a hard place.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to tell our kids, the test is the test, and they're not planning on modifying it like they did last spring. So I'm going to give you everything that you're going to need to prepare, and may not assess all of it, but if you don't do the optional work, you're not going to pass test.
You have optional work?
Well, no, but like, and my principal hasn't said yet, but if it was something like that where you have to assess differently, I would tell them, okay, here's the stuff I'm going to assess for the school grade, but here's all the stuff you need to know for the test. And if you don't, on your own, do whatever it is you need to do for the test, then you're not going to pass it.
Hmm.
So, but I'm fortunate in that we're a small school, and I had all of these kids last year as juniors, and I only have 9 of them. So I already have a rapport with them, so I can kind of lay it flat for them like that, and they'll respond to it. We're a college prep school, and they're all pretty motivated.
Good.
I just have so I mean, and this is kind of good. I really wanted to use Zoom breakout rooms, but just this last week, I've been hearing some kind of like a little bit concerning stories about students being broken into their groups. And I'm just worried about like things like bullying or things like, just inappropriate behavior when, and I know you're going to try to like go into each room, but it's just, have any of you found ways like, what's been your experience with that?
I will say, so my daughter is a 4th grader, and like with the camera and stuff, her teacher is like, as long as I know you're there, you guys are good. And they had something similar to that, and the teacher just pulled them all back into one and reminded, because to him, and the way he kind of explained it to us as parents is like, stuff like this happens in the classroom and I don't always catch it. If it happens online, school rules apply. You can be suspended, like you can still face these things. And I know he tries to jump in to them as much as possible, and then they do a feedback form. So again, she's only in 4th grade, and my husband actually teaches AP US history, and he's going to try this week, is So they'll have like a Google form that he can just make copies of. It's very easy, but it's a feedback form. And it's a very quick, like, how did it go? What went really well? And are there any issues I need to know about? And it is like the form itself, excuse me, when, you know, these things are done, her teacher is like, it takes me maybe 5 minutes to just, because you're just looking for the problems. Or you're looking for kids that are like, I was in a group that nobody was talking, or I was in a group that everybody talked and I couldn't. But it's just these quick feedback forms. But it was made very clear, and I know at the high school too, it was made very clear, school rules still apply. You do not, just because some people act a fool behind and talk crap on social media, this is not the place for that. And you're not anonymous. We know who you are. And my husband just told his kids everything is recorded because they don't know.
Oh, but you can't record Zoom breakout rooms, correct?
But they don't know that.
Oh.
You can tell them, hey, as the teacher, I have teacher access and I can record anything. So don't say anything that you don't want your grandmother to know, because the thing is you can't deny it. That due process is right there. It is you saying it. So those quick, like the feedback forms, and again, they're just very like, how did it go? 1 through 4. They do a scale of 4. How'd it go? 1 through 4. What went really well, or is there anything I need to know? And the like, what went really well, they didn't have to answer, because on forms, like, you don't have to do that. But it was like, here's your chance to report. The only person who reads these are me. So it's that just really quick kind of thing.
Liz, I know you've got, I think you said you got to go, and I want to just get Jen in here real fast because you've got control over the record. Jennifer, are you back yet? Our host from last week, are you back?
Teachers just started today. We don't get kids until the 31st. So we've got 2 weeks of PD to figure out how to do this, because we are doing face-to-face and remote synchronously. So I don't like, I got, my phone is blowing up. Everybody I work with is like, please help me. How do we do this? And I'm like, because I'm the tech guru at the high school, but I don't know. Liz, you said earlier something about how the discussion is a marathon, and you don't.
The writing is like they're writing at the end.
But then isn't the discussion too, if we're teaching them how to have discussions? Yep. If we start grading right away or assessing with anything like that, then, I mean, isn't it like you want to, at the end, have they shown growth? Mm-hmm. We're talking about mastery, and shouldn't that be assessed at the end?
Yes, 100%. I do not assign grades to discussions. Like I said, I always saved Unit 3 for the last, because then we did our moot court and it was like the fun thing. But you always knew where a class was. Like, I had a class that literally the 4th week of school, I was like, this counts for a grade, because you guys, you know exactly what to do. You have felt like I don't even need to exist in this world except to be here to make sure nobody like curses. But then I've had classes that like, we're still pulling along, man. In April, we're still like working on it. And so that grade looks different, because, you know, I have this sheet that I always filled out, and I would tell them, like, I'm not grading you until everything is done. All of my classes have gone. Your writing has been turned in. And then I can see what this looks like as feedback or assessment. Because there have been Socratic seminars that they've done that I'm like, you don't know anything. So tomorrow we actually just need to readdress this. And that sucks. We're going to have to scratch this day. But for them though, I think that made them feel more comfortable, because yeah, I didn't like, sometimes too, if I needed to put grades in because we have to do 2 grades a week, I was like, all right, I guess I'll throw something in here, because the grade, and I think Patrick said this, like your writing grade, that's going to be in a week or 2, that's actually going to be a pretty big grade. And this is all going to be tied in with it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I never, and honestly, it was the year that the girl said, I would rather fail your class than speak. And she had like legitimate diagnosis. And that's what really made me think, what am I doing? why am I doing it? Where do I need my kids to be? So,
well, I also think that there's an opportunity there for a silent discussion where everybody's on a Google Doc and you go back and forth on that. Or maybe I don't know, just that would help the student who doesn't want to speak, because I have a lot of students who are in that same boat. They just don't want to talk. There might be, it's not that they don't know, they're just afraid for a multitude of reasons. And if they're typing it out, it might be better. And it's not all about the test, but if the discussion helps with that argument essay, then writing it is as important as speaking it.
100%.
I don't think, I mean, I know what we're talking about, assessing discussion. I don't know that we need to assess every discussion as much as provide feedback so that at the end, you can say you have mastered or are on your way to mastering the art of discussion.
Yep.
Or not.
Well, and it's an informal assessment. You're saying, okay, based on this discussion, here's where these kids are at right now. And before they have a formal, like, we're grading, we're getting all into it, here's where we're at, here's where I want them to be. So here's all the things that need to happen in between. And I always use my discussion as the informal, do they get it? Do they not? And they never knew that. I would always just be like, yeah, I'm going to grade it. And I would say that. And sometimes I'd just forget to put it in the grade book and nobody ever said anything. So, but it is that informal. And for me, I need to hear it because I feel like multiple choice tests, they can fake. And they can't fake writing and they can't fake speaking. And so it was that. And it also gave me a heads up of like, hey, I noticed that Jen, who normally talks a lot, wasn't talking today. I'm going to check in with her quick and just make sure. And again, it could be because you're tired, or, I mean, there's thousands of things for kids, but it could also be like, hey, Evans, I had no idea what this was. And I was so embarrassed that I didn't want to say anything. And it's like, cool. Do you have 5 minutes to have this discussion with me? And just making sure that they get it. So.
And I'm completely against requiring kids to have their cameras on.
You can't do it.
And we've had this discussion before, but it's a technology issue. It's an equity issue. It's a comfort issue. There's so many issues with, I get it. And I know that teachers that I work with, they're requiring that sucker to be on. And I know in the spring, I had kids who logged into my Google Meet and they took off because they would be in it after everybody else had left, and I knew they weren't there. But you know what? They lost out, and their grade then reflected that, not because they weren't actively involved, like I wasn't taking discussion points or anything, but what we discussed, they couldn't do that assignment.
Yep. Jen, if I could just jump in here. Jeanette, you teach biology, right? AP biology? Well, if there's one thing I've learned from the AP Bio, AP Science Facebook pages, it seems like the science teachers, more so than anybody, want that camera on. But I'm thinking that's because of the nature of the work of the science class. At least that's what's coming back to me. Is it somehow different in the sciences where you just have to see the kids, the lab work? I don't know how, I don't do science, so.
I mean, most of us aren't allowed to do lab work in a virtual setting just because of, obviously, the same issues Jen's saying about cameras, is equity to materials and lab safety issues and stuff. So, I mean, I just think that a lot of teachers just want to see their kids because that's kind of one of the reasons we teach, I think, right? Like, is that we make connections with students and learn who they are. And a lot of what we do isn't just spoken, it's nonverbal and how you are engaging with the material. But I mean, I don't know. I think, again, not requiring kids to have on their camera, but they could still engage by talking or typing, or again, make up the work some other time if they were just having a bad day or couldn't make it, whatever. I mean, like, I guess we're all going to have to wing it on that front, but I don't know. I would like to see my kids because I'd like to know them. And I think it's hard to get to know them unless you're having those authentic real-time conversations, especially about content, but about them as well.
Jeanette, how are you handling labs and stuff then for the AP Bio kids?
So my district bought Pivot Interactives, which is a virtual like lab interface that allows students to actually manipulate data or like manipulate variables that they will then collect data on, and then they'll have to analyze the data themselves. So it's quite a nice little suite for them. It's like $5 a kid, which isn't great, but we're not spending our budget on anything else. So, or at least
So
not now.
so like virtual labs?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yep, but it's somebody doing the labs like as a demo. And then you can like, they're really cool. It looks like a YouTube video, but you can do like an arrow drop down and you can choose like different variables. So like if they were doing an osmosis lab, there's, you know, they can choose a different plant. So there's like a mango or a potato or whatever. And then they can choose a different molarity of solution and then run the play. And it shows like over time what happens to, you know, that little cube. So basically that's the osmosis lab that I usually do with them. And then I set it up as an inquiry lab. But the way the pivot works is that it actually introduces them to osmosis and reviews it with like pre-assessment questions, and they have to get them right and it grades them for you. And then they go through like the cookbook style, like this is how we study osmosis with like a potato. And then they have to collect data on that, or you can delete that component if you want to. That's up to you as a teacher. And then like the last part of most of the labs is an inquiry part where they're able to manipulate different variables and ask different questions in a way that would be individually able to assess their knowledge. So like, you know, tell a kid to ask their own question. They can't, you know, not everybody's going to do mangoes. So figure out a more creative question to ask. Yeah.
What's it called again?
Pivot Interactives. I'll put the link in the chat for you. We just got it. It's there's a 30-day free trial, but all of our AP classes have received funding from our district for that. So I'm pretty grateful that I have that as a resource.
Well, guys, we are at our hour. Anybody have anything they want to say in closing? Final word? 30 words.
I would say just a couple of things. If you can, before your kids get there, depending on what content you're teaching, record direct instruction. If you're going to do direct instruction, record as many as you can and create a database. And you plug them in, kind of like the flip, whatever. Because if they're going to be on their own, and you're going to be like this all your periods, they're going to check out. And it'll be much better for you. You pre-do it. I put everything online, everything on PowerPoint, especially the direct instruction lectures. And then I capture that. I'm talking at the camera. I got some way to write on the PowerPoint with a tablet. And then they're in 15 to 20 to about 30 minutes is really the maximum. And that's probably too long, and that way I can introduce it. I say, okay, you have this much time, a half hour to process it. And then they have an assignment with it instead of me being blah, blah, blah all the time. And then they can watch it on their own. And then they can go, their parents can go back if they need it, you know, but as much as you can record, especially if you're doing during the day, right? If you're doing live, record it. So tons of kids will be absent, and it will save your life. I mean, overworking. It's a little late now because school's starting, but that's one of the things that I prepped with this whole summer is recording all these lectures and things. So it does take a lot of work, but I think it's really will be very, very helpful in the long run. So that would be my 2 cents on that.
Nice, yeah. Anybody else have anything in closing? Well, all right then.
If when we want to go back and watch this again, where will we find the recording of it?
Well, it's up. They're up on YouTube, and I'm also going to be sending them out. Everybody who's registered